Some of you are walking around today with a heavy heart, not because of what you did wrong, but because of what was done to you. And no one sees the weight you're carrying. No one hears the words that wounded you. No one knows the betrayal, the silence, the rejection. But God does. He sees the hurt you've buried deep. He sees the nights you've cried silently. He sees how you've smiled in public but collapsed in private. And He's not ignoring it. He's not turning away from it. He's not telling you to just get over it. Because God does not dismiss pain. He deals with it. But here's the part most people forget. God doesn't always deal with it the way we want Him to. You want justice right now. You want closure right now. You want the person who hurt you to feel what you felt, to carry what you carried. But God's way is higher. And sometimes that means He doesn't respond with quick retaliation. Sometimes that means He doesn't strike them down or expose their sin on your timeline. Sometimes it means He lets the story unfold in silence. And in that silence, you start to question. You wonder if God saw it at all. You wonder if He cares. You wonder if He's letting them win. But here's what you need to know. God is not ignoring your pain. He's storing it. Every tear, every sigh, every wordless prayer, it's not forgotten, it's not wasted, it's not unnoticed. God keeps record, not because He's petty, but because He's just. And justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it moves slowly, quietly, through process, through timing, through the unseen work of heaven behind the curtain of what looks like silence. You think nothing is happening, but heaven is moving. You think you're forgotten, but you're being preserved. You think they're getting away with it, but God is setting the stage for something deeper. Because God doesn't just want to fix what happened to you. He wants to heal you through it. He wants to grow you beyond it. He wants to strengthen what the enemy tried to break. That's why vengeance is not yours. That's why retaliation is not your assignment. That's why silence is not weakness, it's surrender. When you try to avenge yourself, you become like the person who hurt you. You take justice into your own hands. You start feeding bitterness. You start speaking from pain, not wisdom. And instead of healing, you deepen the wound. But when you hand it to God, you step out of the courtroom and into peace. You say, God, you saw it. You judge it. You deal with it. That's not passivity. That's power. Because it means you trust His justice more than your own emotions. And His justice is never late. It's never weak. It's never driven by ego or wounded pride. It's driven by righteousness. It's delivered in perfect timing. And it always accomplishes more than your anger ever could. So if you've been holding on to what they did, if you've been building walls to keep the pain out, but also keeping joy away, if you've been rehearsing conversations that never brought closure, it's time to release it. Not because they deserve peace, but because you do. Not because it wasn't real, but because you refuse to let it rule you. Not because you're weak, but because you're finally strong enough to let go. And when you release it, something happens. Your hands become free to receive what's next. Your heart becomes soft again. Your mind becomes clear again. Your prayers become deeper. Your faith becomes bolder because you're no longer dragging the weight of someone else's sin into your future. You're no longer building your life around what broke you. You're building it on the one who restores you. There is something sacred about letting go, not because it's easy, but because it's powerful. Not because it means what happened was okay, but because it means you've chosen not to let it own you anymore. Letting go is not forgetting. It's not pretending. It's not denial. It's saying, I will not carry this into my next season. Because what hurt you may not have been your fault, but what heals you is your responsibility. And healing doesn't happen by chance. It happens by choice. You choose not to respond. You choose not to retaliate. You choose not to relive what God has already called you out of. You choose to trust that what He will do is greater than what they did. But that's not easy when the pain is real, when the betrayal was deep, when the silence was loud, when the people you love most became the source of your deepest wounds. That kind of pain doesn't leave quickly. That kind of disappointment doesn't vanish overnight. It lingers. It shapes how you trust, how you love, how you see people, how you pray. And if you're not careful, it will harden your heart in places you didn't even know could grow cold. Because pain has a voice. It doesn't just cry, it whispers. It tells you no one understands. It tells you everyone will hurt you. It tells you to protect yourself by pushing people away. It tells you to build walls instead of bridges. But God speaks a better word. He speaks healing. He speaks hope. He speaks restoration over what feels ruined. And He doesn't rush your healing. He sits with you in it. He walks you through it. He calls you by name while you're still limping. He reminds you that broken doesn't mean unusable, that wounded doesn't mean worthless, that pain doesn't cancel purpose. Because God does not discard the broken. He redeems them. He restores what was lost. He rebuilds what was shattered. And sometimes the very wound that brought you to your knees becomes the very place where His glory is revealed. But it starts with surrender, not just once, but daily. You wake up and say, God, I still feel it, but I give it to you again. You go to bed and whisper, God, it still hurts, but I'm still trusting you. And every time you surrender it, you weaken its grip. You break the cycle. You silence the lie. You create space for grace to work where anger used to live. That's what healing looks like. Not perfection, but progression. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of peace. A peace that says, I don't need to carry this anymore. A peace that says, God will deal with it in His way, in His time. And while He deals with it, He's also dealing with you. He's softening what was hardened. He's filling what was empty. He's planting hope where only bitterness used to grow. Because when God heals, He doesn't just patch you up, He makes you new. And that renewal becomes your testimony. Not just that you survived, but that you're whole again. That you didn't become like the ones who hurt you. That you didn't let the darkness in them create darkness in you. That you stood in grace when revenge seemed easier. That you chose the harder path and found freedom on it. Some of you are trying to move forward, but the past keeps calling your name. You're trying to trust again, but the memory of betrayal whispers that you can't. You're trying to love again, but fear tells you you'll just get hurt. You're trying to believe again, but the silence of unanswered prayers haunts your hope. That's what pain does. It echoes, it repeats, it replays scenes you wish you could erase. And if you're not careful, it doesn't just stay in your past, it starts shaping your present. You begin to assume that what happened before is what will happen again. You begin to prepare for disappointment before the door even opens. You begin to expect rejection in places where God intended acceptance. And slowly, without realizing it, you stop living. You start surviving, guarded, closed, suspicious, cold. But that is not the life God called you to. You were not designed to walk through life in self-protection mode. You were not built to live with your heart behind locked doors. You were created for freedom, for healing, for relationships that reflect His goodness, not your trauma. But to walk in that freedom, you must face the truth. Your pain has built walls that faith needs to tear down. And tearing them down won't feel safe. It will feel risky. It will feel like exposure. It will feel like letting go of the only defense you've known. But you have to ask, has that defense really protected you? Or has it isolated you? Has it really kept you safe? Or has it kept you stuck? Because there comes a point when the pain becomes too expensive to carry. When the weight of pretending you're fine is heavier than just being honest. When the cost of staying numb is greater than the risk of being healed. And that's the moment you bring it to God, fully, not with filters, not with fancy words, not with forced faith, just you as you are, raw, tired, wounded, and willing. Willing to say, God, I don't want to live like this anymore. Willing to say, God, I don't know how to fix this, but I know you can. Willing to let go of bitterness, even if forgiveness still feels far. Because healing isn't about rushing. It's about releasing. It's not about forgetting. It's about freeing yourself from what controls you. And when you begin to release it, day by day, moment by moment, God begins to rewrite your story. He takes the chapters the enemy tried to use to break you and turns them into testimonies that strengthen others. He takes the very thing you thought disqualified you and uses it as the evidence of His mercy. And no, it doesn't erase the past, but it redeems it. It gives purpose to pain. It turns wounds into wisdom, scars into signs of survival, and your life becomes proof, not of what people did to you, but of what God did through you. So stop shrinking to fit into a story that hurt you. Stop rehearsing the version of you that pain created. Start believing in the version of you that healing is producing. Because you're not just a person who was hurt. You are a person God is restoring. Healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quietest thing in your life. It doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like vulnerability. It's not always a sudden breakthrough. Sometimes it's a slow turning, a gentle shift, a deeper breath, a softer heart. Because real healing is not always marked by what changes around you. It's marked by what changes within you. When you stop reacting like you used to. When you stop needing to prove your worth. When you stop letting someone else's absence define your value. That's healing. It's subtle, but it's sacred. It's invisible, but it's real. And it's happening even when it feels like nothing is. Even when you still cry sometimes. Even when the memories still visit. Even when forgiveness still feels like a stretch. Because healing is not perfection. It's not the absence of reminders. It's the presence of peace in the middle of them. That's how you know God is working. Not because you forget, but because you're no longer defined by what you remember. You can look back without staying there. You can feel without being ruled by it. You can speak of it without breaking under it. That's what happens when God does the healing. Not you, not time, not therapy alone, but the Spirit of the living God reaching into the places you hid the deepest and bringing light where shame once lived. And when He touches those places, things begin to shift. Not always fast, but always faithful. Because God doesn't rush healing. He walks it with you. He meets you in the moments you think no one sees. In the middle of the night when your chest feels heavy, in the conversations you replay 1,000 times, in the stillness where regret tries to speak louder than grace, He's there. He doesn't flinch at your pain. He doesn't step back from your mess. He draws closer. Because healing isn't just something God gives, it's where He lives. He lives in the process. He lives in the tears. He lives in the tension between who you were and who you're becoming. And the more you stay with Him in that process, the more you realize healing is not something you earn. It's something you allow. You allow Him to go deep. You allow Him to take His time. You allow Him to remove what you've depended on. You allow Him to soften what life hardened. And that permission is powerful. Because God won't force His way in. He waits to be invited. He waits for your surrender, not your strength, not your solutions, just your surrender. And from that place, healing begins to take root. It may not look like what you expected. It may not come on the timeline you wanted, but it will come. And when it does, you won't just be the same person with less pain. You'll be a new creation. You'll walk different, speak different, love different. Because healed people carry a presence that can't be faked. They carry peace that doesn't shout, it settles. They carry hope that doesn't boast, it breathes. And they carry stories that don't glorify the pain. They glorify the healer. One of the most dangerous things about being hurt is what it can quietly convince you to believe, not just about people, but about yourself, about God, about life. Because pain doesn't just leave a wound, it plants lies. Lies that say you deserved it. Lies that say you'll never recover. Lies that say you're too broken to be whole again. And if you don't confront those lies, you'll start living like they're truth. You'll begin to adjust your identity around the injury. You'll begin to build your future around fear. You'll begin to relate to others through suspicion, not trust. And before you know it, you've built a life designed to avoid more pain, but also unable to receive deep joy. That's what the enemy wants. Not just to hurt you, but to change how you see yourself, to take a moment of betrayal and stretch it into a lifetime of insecurity, to take one chapter of pain and make it the headline of your entire story, to convince you that healing is for others, but not for you. But God never writes people off like that. He doesn't define you by what was done to you. He defines you by what He's placed in you. And He's placed resilience. He's placed purpose. He's placed the power to rise again, not by force, but by faith. Faith that says what happened to me is real, but it's not the end of my story. Faith that says I may be wounded, but I'm not worthless. Faith that says I can walk forward even if I still limp, because in the kingdom of God, even limping counts as progress. Even slow steps are sacred when you take them in surrender. And sometimes that's the most powerful thing you can do. Not run, not fight, not explain. Just take the next step through the tears, through the questions, through the ache that hasn't fully healed. You take the next step. And as you move, heaven moves with you. Grace meets you. Peace walks beside you. And strength begins to grow in places you thought would always stay weak. But that only happens when you stop letting pain speak louder than purpose. When you stop letting fear control your next move. When you stop living small just to feel safe. You are not here to survive your wounds. You are here to rise from them. You are not here to bury what happened and pretend. You are here to walk through it and be transformed. Because the story doesn't end with the wound. It ends with the healing. It ends with the redemption. It ends with a testimony that says, yes, I was hurt, but God was faithful. And that testimony is not just for you. It's for someone else who's still in the middle of their pain. Someone who needs to see that it's possible. That wholeness is not a fantasy. That peace after betrayal is real. That joy after grief can be restored. But they won't believe it just because you preach it. They'll believe it because you live it. So let God finish what he started. Let him make your pain into a platform, not for pride, but for purpose. Not to show off your strength, but to point to his. When God begins to heal you, the enemy will try to remind you. He'll whisper, but remember what they did? He'll point back to the wound and say, see, it still hurts. He'll take a moment of progress and drown it in the memory of your pain. Because that's his only real power, accusation. He can't undo your healing. He can't unwrite your redemption. So he tries to steal your attention, to get you so focused on what was that you miss what is. To get you caught up in memory while God is writing a miracle. That's why part of healing is learning to silence the voices that try to drag you back. Not just external ones, but internal ones. That voice that says you're not really free. That voice that says you should have seen it coming. That voice that says you'll never be able to love without fear again. But here's the truth. God never speaks through shame. He convicts, but he doesn't condemn. He corrects, but he never belittles. He heals, but he never humiliates. So if the voice in your head is shaming you, silencing you, or suffocating your hope, it's not from him. You are not the sum of your scars. You are not the echo of your trauma. You are not a broken story waiting for validation. You are a living testimony of mercy, a walking declaration of grace, a vessel in process, but still a vessel of glory. And yes, the process is messy. Yes, the journey has days of setback. Yes, there will be moments when you feel like the pain is louder than the promise. But healing is not linear. It comes in layers. One layer for the memory, one layer for the trust, one layer for the fear, one layer for the self-worth. God peels back what the pain tried to wrap around you, not to expose you, but to set you free. Because hiding won't heal you, pretending won't fix you, running won't restore you. Only truth sets free. And truth isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it calls you to face what you'd rather avoid, to speak what you've never said aloud, to forgive what you swore you never would. But every time you embrace truth, you break the chains that pain tried to forge around your heart. You open the door to joy. You make room for peace. You clear space for God to breathe in you again. That's why healing is holy. Not because it's easy, but because it's sacred. Because every tear cried in surrender waters a future of strength. Every step taken in obedience builds a life of substance. Every time you let go of control, you pick up a new layer of courage. You start to see yourself not as a victim, but as a vessel. Not as abandoned, but chosen. Not as forgotten, but carried. Not as damaged, but destined. And the moment you stop rehearsing the pain is the moment you start releasing the promise. So choose today to stop feeding what's behind you. Start nurturing what God is birthing within you. Because healing doesn't end with feeling better. It ends with becoming bolder. Some people think that healing means reconciliation, that the only way to fully move on is to restore what was broken with the person who broke it. But let's be clear, healing and reconciliation are not the same. Forgiveness is required. Reconciliation is optional. Forgiveness is between you and God. Reconciliation involves them too. And not everyone is safe to reconcile with. Not everyone is willing to own their part. Not everyone is ready to walk in truth. Some people want the comfort of your presence without the responsibility of change. They want access to your life without accountability for their actions. They want peace without confession. And if you're not careful, your compassion will become compromise. You'll confuse kindness with permission. You'll open doors God already told you to close. You'll give second chances to patterns that haven't repented. But love doesn't always mean return. Sometimes love means release. Sometimes love means saying, I forgive you, but I won't partner with that pain again. That's not bitterness. That's wisdom. That's not unforgiveness. That's discernment. Because God doesn't call you to enable what He died to free you from. He calls you to peace. And peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the presence of clarity. It's knowing what you're called to carry and what you're no longer responsible for. It's setting boundaries not out of hate, but out of healing. Because when you've truly been restored, you no longer tolerate environments that wounded you. You no longer shrink to fit into rooms that required your silence. You no longer chase validation from voices that once betrayed you. You move different. You think different. You choose different. Not because you're cold, but because you're healed. Because now your worth is not up for negotiation. Your peace is not a bargaining chip. Your joy is not contingent on who stays or who leaves. You've anchored yourself in something deeper, in the truth of who you are in Christ. And that truth reorders your life. It shapes your decisions. It filters your relationships. It tells you that you are loved, even if they never say sorry, that you are valuable, even if they never come back, that you are whole, even if the apology never arrives. That is the freedom healing brings, not just from what happened, but from the need to have it fixed on your terms, because healing gives you power, not over others, but over your own soul. The power to bless instead of curse. The power to walk away without bitterness. The power to speak truth without vengeance. The power to stand tall, even when they don't acknowledge your growth. That's when you know the wound is no longer the loudest voice in the room. That's when you know grace has done its work. When you can look at what broke you and not flinch. When you can think of them and feel peace instead of poison. When you can release the story and finally live. Healing doesn't make you forget what happened. It teaches you how to remember without reliving it. It teaches you how to carry wisdom without carrying the wound. It teaches you how to walk forward, not because the past vanished, but because it no longer defines your direction. And that shift changes everything. You stop needing closure from people who never gave you honesty. You stop waiting for an apology that may never come. You stop expecting others to validate your growth. You simply live. You breathe differently. You speak with more clarity and less defensiveness. You love with more caution, but also more confidence. Because healing didn't just soften your heart, it made you strong. It gave you eyes to see through manipulation. It gave you discernment to separate intention from pattern. It gave you the courage to walk alone if it means protecting your peace. peace. And that's not pride. That's maturity. That's the fruit of grace doing its deep work. You no longer operate out of desperation for connection. You no longer trade your value for proximity. You no longer lower your standards just to keep someone's attention because you've come too far. You've prayed too much. You've cried too many nights. You've surrendered too deeply to go back to versions of yourself that beg for scraps of love. Now you know better. Now you walk in the kind of strength that doesn't need to prove anything. The kind of wisdom that doesn't need to explain. The kind of peace that doesn't need to be defended. That's the power of healing rooted in God, not just emotional relief, but spiritual authority. You don't just feel better, you become clearer. And that clarity allows you to spot the schemes of the enemy sooner. You no longer entertain what's familiar if it threatens your growth. You no longer call it loyalty when it's really bondage. You no longer confuse chemistry with calling. You start choosing people based on alignment, not attachment, on fruit, not words, on peace, not performance. And sometimes that means walking away from what once felt safe. It means grieving the loss of what you once prayed for. It means admitting that some doors stayed closed because God loved you enough to protect you. But that's part of healing too, trusting that his no was never punishment. It was preparation. It was redirection. It was mercy. And now, on this side of it, you can see what you couldn't back then. You can see how God used the pain to teach you discernment, how he used the delay to develop your character, how he used the heartbreak to bring you closer to his heart. None of it was wasted. None of it was random. None of it went unseen. God was in it all, not causing the harm, but redeeming it. And that's what healing does. It takes what should have destroyed you and turns it into depth, into insight, into power. And you carry it not with pride, but with gratitude. Not as proof that you're invincible, but that you're preserved, that you're held, that you're still standing. And that's more than enough. Some of the greatest spiritual battles you'll ever fight won't come from what happens around you, but from what happens inside you after you've been hurt. Not the injury itself, but the invitation it brings. Because pain always brings an invitation. An invitation to harden your heart, to build walls so thick no one can get in, to trade grace for bitterness, to let go of hope and pick up cynicism. And it doesn't happen all at once. It happens little by little. You stop praying with expectation. You stop trusting people who haven't done anything wrong. You start assuming the worst before you ever give life a chance to prove otherwise. And just like that, the enemy doesn't have to destroy you. He just has to convince you to close your own heart. He just has to get you to settle for numbness, to live safe, to never risk vulnerability again. But that is not how healing wins. Healing doesn't mean you never hurt again. It means the hurt doesn't get to control your life. It means your heart stays open, even when your scars remind you why it's easier to shut down. It means you keep showing up, not blindly, but bravely, not recklessly, but wisely. It means you choose to believe that just because someone broke your trust doesn't mean everyone will. That just because something failed doesn't mean everything will. That just because you were hurt doesn't mean you have to live guarded for the rest of your life. Because protection is good, but isolation is dangerous. Guard your heart, yes. But don't lock it away so tightly that God can't use it. Don't shield it so fiercely that no one can reach it. Don't shrink so far into yourself that you forget how to feel again, because healing was never meant to make you hard. It was meant to make you holy, to make you whole, to make you soft in the right ways and strong in the right places, to make you more like Christ. And Christ didn't love from a distance. He loved fully. He stepped into betrayal knowing it was coming. He forgave in real time. He embraced the cross not because it was safe, but because it was redemptive. And if he lives in you, then that same power to love through pain lives in you too. You can be wise and still be open. You can be discerning and still be compassionate. You can be cautious and still choose courage. That's what healing invites you into. Not a small life, but a sacred one. Not a quiet survival, but a bold return. A return to trust, to laughter, to risk, to connection, to purpose, to peace. And the beauty of healing is this. You don't have to wait until you feel ready to begin. You just have to take the next step, because the same God who walked with you through the valley will walk with you into the promise. The same God who met you in brokenness will meet you in restoration. And the same God who carried you through the pain is already preparing the table for your joy. You've made it through the pain. You've walked through the fire. You've cried prayers no one else heard. You've kept moving when quitting would have been easier. And now you're still here. Not because the hurt didn't happen, but because the healer never left. Not because the pain wasn't real, but because the promise was greater. Not because you had all the strength, but because his strength was made perfect in your weakness. That's the truth no wound can erase. That's the story no betrayal can cancel. That's the testimony no silence can bury. Because in every moment where you thought you were alone, God was writing redemption. In every season you thought was wasted, he was planting seeds. In every delay you thought was denial, he was doing deep work. And now, what once tried to destroy you has become the soil from which new life is growing, because God doesn't waste pain. He doesn't ignore injustice. He doesn't overlook brokenness. He works through it. He heals through it. He raises people through it. People like you, people who didn't give up, people who still believe, people who know what it means to carry scars and still worship, to walk with a limp and still lead, to look back at what was meant for evil and see the fingerprints of a faithful God all over it. So don't minimize your journey. Don't be ashamed of how long it took. Don't hide the healing. Let it be seen. Let it speak. Let it bless someone else who is still in the dark, because your survival is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of someone else's hope. You're not just a healed person. You're a healer now. You carry oil. You carry wisdom. You carry the kind of love that understands pain without being consumed by it. And that makes you dangerous to the kingdom of darkness. That makes you a light in someone else's night. So keep walking. Keep speaking. Keep believing. Don't retreat into silence. Don't let the enemy convince you that your softness is weakness. Don't let fear keep you from connection. Don't let the past write your future. Let God finish what he started. Let him use every piece, every ache, every scar, every prayer. Let him turn it all into power. Not the kind that dominates, but the kind that endures. Not the kind that controls, but the kind that carries peace. Because that's what healed people do. They carry peace. They make space for others to breathe again. They create safety where fear used to rule. They show what grace looks like in real time. And they never forget who brought them through. So never forget. Never forget how far you've come. Never forget the nights you survived. Never forget the mercy that met you. Never forget that the same God who healed you is still healing others through you. And that, more than anything, is how God deals with those who hurt you. He heals you so deeply that you no longer need revenge. He fills you so fully that you no longer crave validation. He surrounds you so completely that you no longer fear who left. He rewrites your story with so much glory that even the pain loses its power. Not because it didn't happen, but because he did something greater.